Have you ever had a dream project, but not the resources to make it happen? On today's show, we'll be talking about crafting a winning proposal, a sponsorship proposal with Karl Dakin, entrepreneur, educator, and capital coach. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Madeline Blair, and this is Unlocked, a show all about unlocking the resilient leader in you. Thousands watch or listen to Unlocked every week. If you like the show and you like what we do, support us by giving us a thumbs up and hitting the subscribe button. You already know that I will do everything in my power to make this show better for you every single week. Thank you so much. I used to be on radio. It was a show called Unlocked and had 600,000 listeners. I switched to TV where this show is today. But back then, I wanted to use that radio platform to help small towns in America. It didn't need much money, but still I could find no sponsors. So today, I'm going to explore what it means to find sponsors, and maybe for that dream too. I'm being joined today by Karl Dakin, an entrepreneur, educator, and capital coach, with more than 4 decades of experience helping people turn ideas into funded, thriving ventures. As the author of The Motivated Money Method, Karl teaches entrepreneurs how to find and connect with the investors most likely to believe in them. And through his instant funding newsletter and successful funding show on LinkedIn, Karl shares practical, no-nonsense advice about raising capital with confidence. He also serves as an adjunct professor at the University of Denver, where he mentors emerging innovators and change makers. Passionate about empowering underrepresented entrepreneurs, including women, leading startups, small businesses, and community projects. Karl helps them access the resources and relationships they need to grow. His mission is simple: to make funding more human, inclusive, and achievable for everyone with a great idea. I'm going to say that again. His mission is simple: to make funding more human, inclusive, and achievable for everyone with a great idea. Karl Dakin, welcome to Unlocked.
Madeline, thank you for having me as a guest. I'm happy to be here, and thank you for that introduction. My ego is filling out rapidly. So.
Good. I'm good. That's the purpose. It has nothing to do with letting the audience know who you are.
No, right. It's all about me. Yeah.
Now, you've spent 4 decades helping businesses. How did you get involved with this? I'm really curious about that story.
The long story goes all the way back to rural Kansas, where I was born and raised, into an entrepreneurial family. My family was engaged in farming, and they had a Chevrolet car dealership, and they sold farm equipment to about a 50-mile square area of the territory that crossed the border over into Missouri. And through that, I not only got firsthand experience, but I dabbled on my own in setting up my own businesses on the side to create any income to supplement the free wages that I was paid by my parents.
Oh, I so relate to that free wage. Yeah, I started working for my mother at 9. But it's a good way to grow up, I think.
It's definitely different because very early on, you can start understanding the value of hard work. You understand the importance of deadlines when they say make hay while the sun shines. That's not just a little comment, that's a reality.
It's a reality.
And working 24/7 becomes a bad habit that I still maintain today.
I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. I grew up on a farm also. And you're right, it's 24/7. I'm going to have to think about that one. All right, back to the subject. I had Yvonne DeMonk on the show last month to talk about investment crowdfunding. And you too have been a pioneer in the crowdfunding space and new funding models. When should a startup consider alternatives like equity crowdfunding or community investors instead of, or maybe in addition to pursuing corporate sponsors?
The actuality is that anyone who's thinking about starting to raise funding because they don't have all the resources that they need should first start with development of a capital strategy that goes forward 3, 4, or 5 years with the goal in mind, and then reverse engineering from there back to where they're at today to determine exactly what resources they need at what time towards accomplishment of milestones along that path. With that, that gives them a better vision of what their true needs are and where they need to go. They don't oversell this stage in order to get to the next stage and find themselves with too little left over. Or the worst case scenario is somebody else owns your company and you own little or nothing, and you're doing all the hard work, and it doesn't justify the blood, sweat, and tears that went into your efforts. By doing that, at the very outset, you want to look at what is it that you actually need, like your shopping list to go to a grocery store, and say, these are the things I need to move my business forward: people, equipment, buildings, whatever. And then where can I get those? And what can I give up in exchange for those? And now you're starting to come up with some formulas that could support a proposal or an offer of investment that may take you off path into alternative investment forms immediately. It's not necessarily a later stage type of a question.
That's interesting. So you're suggesting that when you really think it through, there may be areas of your capital needs that would go to different kinds of sources of funds.
It's one of my aberration thoughts that I share with everyone is that instead of going to someone who doesn't know you and asking them for money and trying to educate them on what you do and to engage in a risky venture, you might just go to the person who has the asset or resource you need and talk to them directly. And because you're going to spend the money on them anyway. If I need, for example, a vice president of sales, if I can get them to take less than market value for their compensation package, I've achieved an investment in my company to the extent that there's a delta between the market price and what they're agreeing to take now. And I'm going to give them either deferred income commissions or stock or something down the road. So this net allows me to whittle down my true capital needs to something that's a smaller dollar amount and makes obtaining that dollar amount all the more manageable.
I see. This is going to be a real exercise in creativity as you go after your resources. I like that.
Yeah.
Now,
No, I have an example of a guy came to me with a widget device and he said about $50,000. And so I asked him to break it down, all where all the money would be used, use of proceeds, as it's called in raising money. And we went through each item, and I either got somebody directly to give it, or I figured out how to get it at a lesser price. We ended up only needing about $5,000 of 50 in hard cash. And because we had already obtained all the other resources, that not only improved the credibility of the person seeking funding, but each person who made that other investment, this in-kind investment, served as an endorsement of the overall project. By the time we got to raising money from someone we didn't know for cash, it was a very good story.
oh, I love that. I really like that. You've already got my wheels going. You've also raised funding for charities and community projects, and I'm really curious about some aspects of crafting proposals on that in that area and successes that you've had.
Yeah, actually, this morning prior to this show, I'm working on a charitable raffle system for the United States that would allow a charity to post a raffle drawing offering on a display in a high foot traffic area where anyone who walks by would have a chance to see the raffle, buy a raffle ticket, and thereby enable the charity to have a much better presence in raising their funding at a higher quality level and still meeting all the state requirements for compliance and operating that kind of an activity. And as you're raising money for a charity, you have to keep in mind that anyone who's making a donation, acting as a donor, they have their own personal preferences. And an even greater issue, which I talk to charities about, is that almost everyone you're going to talk to has already made that preference. They've already selected a charity, they've already committed to another charity, and your goal is not to convert them to leave that charity and come to your charity. That's not very charitable, as we would describe. But you're looking for people who either are looking for something new or want to build a relationship with a charity. And so you're out there exploring, trying to find those who are not, they're unaffiliated, as we would call them, and then find out if they care enough about your charity that this could be something that they were willing to take hard-earned money out of their pocket and put it into what you're doing. At the individual level, that gets very hard when people have very little money, so it's got to be something very dear to their heart. But if you get into the corporate level, where the company wants to align their brand with a positive cause, then again, you probably are talking about a personal interest of the CEO or somebody in the C-suite who will pick you over all the other charities soliciting them for funding. But when you then work with them, one of the failings of most charities is that they treat a donation as a gift and then they forget that the sponsor or the donor exists. We work with charities to try, the people or the sponsors, to try to give them a profile, a public presence in association with their brand with the charity that can compete with ad dollars that they might spend anywhere else. So instead of buying Google AdWords or buying an ad in the local news magazine, we're saying if you put on your white hat, pull it down firm, and tell your staff, the public, your customers, put it into your newsletters, do all these things, you may achieve a ratio, as they talk about, of so many dollars per thousand viewers that is equivalent to what you would have paid elsewhere. So now the charity is providing a secondary service, which is allowing that brand to get the greatest value from their association with the charity.
Because the real issue is exposure.
This is the distinction. Too often, the donors approach, give me money, and they get very little out of it except a warm feeling in their heart. We're trying to elevate it so that they get the greatest value from being a donor, and to some degree, it serves a secondary purpose of allowing this good cause to be publicized. So you're leveraging the promotion of the donor sponsor to get to their audience, which can create more donors. So it creates that viral cascade that we look for in any funding campaign.
I'm curious, you've obviously worked with many people. Have you ever worked with young people? And what are the issues that young people would struggle with?
Yes, I work with young people. I'm going to describe young as anywhere from being in middle school all the way to age 85, because if this is their first time in business and they're a rookie entrepreneur, they're going to have a lot of the same issues of not knowing what they don't know that's going to get them in trouble. And particularly in raising money, there are so many myths and falsehoods out there that more often than not, half of my time is spent discarding the myths and getting down to reality before we can plow into it and get down to the hard details of how do you identify a potential investor sponsor, what kind of structure deal can you put on the table that will work for them and not drive them away, and then how do you present that in the best positive fashion so you're more efficient in raising your funding.
Okay, that's the common thing. But Let's take some exceptional pieces. How about women? Do they have particular issues when they're trying to get sponsorship?
Absolutely. Inherently, right now in the capital industry, there is a bias. It's not against women, it's not in that sense, but it's a bias towards the status quo. As an example, I was presenting at an artificial intelligence conference, and I was trying to explain that ChatGPT and large language models have an inherent bias because they're an aggregation of everything that's happened in the past. And it's not truly a sentient being sitting there cogitating about what we're doing. They're just spitting out averages. That consensus information over time has been predominantly to middle-aged white men who are out raising funding. And if you ask it for the top 10 things you should put in your pitch deck, it'll give you 10 precise, correct answers for middle-aged men who are out raising funding. So if you're a woman and you're trying to seek capital, you need to almost out of the gate recognize that common approaches, common systems are biased against you, not intentionally, but that's just the way it is. And you need to then make yourself more distinctive. You may even need to just plant the flag and say, this is a woman-owned venture. And if you're not going to give me a little special attention or recognition of that, then I'm going to be in an inferior position to everybody else you're looking at. And I don't want to be there. These are things that are there. And sometimes the old rules that if you're number two, you have to try harder. If you're a woman raising funding, you're going to have to do a better job than a guy. And then where possible, you want to look for funding sources who have a predisposition or intentional bias or outright sexual preference towards women-owned businesses, because it's easier hunting grounds by definition. And within my motivated money method, that's where I always start. My goal is not to find the hardest money to find, it's the easiest money to find.
I like that. I like that because you can spend a lot of time going after resources. You mentioned something called the money market, motivated money market. What is that?
It's basically a technique or a method. I haven't come up with a really good descriptor for it, but it's my way of going hunting for funding. And as the banner behind me says, motivated money, you got to make sure there's words in the right sequence, because I'm not motivated by money. I'm looking for money that's motivated to help me do what I want to do. So I'm looking for alignment, for affinity. I'm looking for someone actually within this method. The optimum investor is what I call a funding soulmate. This is someone who needs you to succeed in order to achieve their own mission, their own milestones, their own goals. You're the ingredient in baking a cake where you're the sugar and they want to make a cake and they can't find sugar from anywhere else. By doing that, where you find a person who actually needs you, it changes the entire demeanor, the whole tenor of a conversation. I'm not pitching anymore. I'm filling an order. I'm trying to fit myself into something they've already designed. And again, I have to be careful not to dictate how I'm structuring my deal until I know what they need and how they need it. But if I can fit into their business model, into the way they're going to business, I have an immediate investor. And it's a very short, quick thing to do. If I can find within any particular venture a funding soulmate, we get done with the funding in a hurry and we can get back to business, as I call it.
Yeah.
Whereas,
can you give me an example of where that happened?
Yeah, I've got several examples where somebody may have a building that's empty, it's vacant, they don't know what to do with it. And they're thinking, I'm just going to go to the common market. And now they're faced with competition with everybody else. But they then go to the local economic development group who's trying to recruit a new business into town. And now the economic development office is trying to find a building for that recruited business into town. We've harmonized with the local government. We've harmonized with a business that's not in the community. And then in that fashion, we have the ability to fulfill the needs. If the business wants to buy the building, I've sold the building. If they want to invest in the building, as a way of prepayment of leases over time or some other thing. Or I may now qualify for 4 or 5 different types of economic development money, from historic building revitalization to improving the environmental system within it through PACE funding. Half a dozen things automatically become available to me to make this thing fundable, where before I just had an empty building.
I know you've helped women. What's an example of where they were able to overcome any resistance or bias or just the naturalness of this kind of situation, and they were successful?
Be careful adding the successful requirement to the storyline, because I deal with a lot of startups and new ideas and so forth. So I have a higher, as we call it, fatality rate in the projects I work with. And I tell people that I'm successful about 20% of the time, which a lot of people are aghast. They're like, how can you have that high of a failure rate, which is maybe less than that of a major league batter? But by definition, if you pitch to an angel investor, you have less than a 2% chance of being funded. So I think my record being 10 times higher than the average of pitching an angel is an acceptable level to some people, but to me, I still would prefer to get up into the 60, 80% success rate. And that's part of the reason for the motivated money, is that one of the common errors of a small business is they go out and pitch to everybody. And 80, 90, 98% of those people are going to turn them down. In fact, 100% may turn them down. And all the time they spend pitching to somebody who will never write a check is a complete waste of time that they don't have. They don't have an unlimited clock. They don't have an unlimited checkbook to pay for the expenses of raising funding. So they have to get to success as quickly as reasonably possible. That's part of the reason before even starting a capital campaign, you want to identify those people who are most likely to invest. You're going to assess the qualitative, quantitative reasons why they would invest, which goes into structuring the deal and the proposal. Your proposal is intended to advance the mission of the investor, not just yourself. If you think and pitch yourself singularly as the sole purpose, the sole topic of the pitch, your chances getting funded are less than 2%. What we want to do is figure out who to talk to, what to say, how to say it, and then move through an orderly, efficient process to be introduced if we don't know them, or to bring this to their attention and walk through 3, 4, 5, 7-step pitch process.
You also use a term, or the phrase rather, know, trust, and buy. It sounds like you've just been talking about that aspect of what you're talking about. Say more.
There are 3 essential criteria to any funding deal. The first one is that they have to trust you. Trust comes from knowing you, so it's a subset of the trust factor. But you're asking somebody to give you resources to put them in your trust, as we would call it, for you to manage and do things good with it, and then to pay them back in the future. And so they have to know you. They have to believe that what you're trying to do is possible. They have to believe you're competent to basically implement your business plan. All these things go into trust. The second thing that is that they have to have the money or the resource you're looking for. Unfortunately, this seems like a Captain Obvious kind of a challenge, that the number of times you can talk to someone who will tell you that they're an investor and they have no money, or their money is dependent upon sale of an asset that may or may not happen in the near future, is way too high. And for whatever reason, in times of economic chaos like we're in now, there is a tendency of people to continue to wear the label of an investor and tell you that they're looking for investments when they have nothing to invest. And this falls into the category, if they have no money, then they can't help you. And so even in your first contact with a particular investor candidate, you have to ask them point blank in almost a rude like fashion.
Do you have the money?
Yeah. Do you have the money? Yes, absolutely. And it sometimes sounds silly, but the number of times I've seen people go through 5, 10, or more contacts with investor candidate, never ask the question, only to find out that they don't have the money is way too many. So it's one of my points that I try to focus on.
As
The
a
third,
consultant, as a consultant, I can tell you one of the things you always have to check is, do you have the authority to give me the contract? It's
right.
very similar. Yeah.
Yeah, and that goes hand in hand. Yeah, you have the money. As the larger the organization, the greater the probability that money and authority and capability of authorizing are not all in
Same
this.
place.
So the third part, which ends up being the hard part, is that you have to compete for money. Anyone you're talking to for funding typically has many different people also pitching them for money, and you have to be superior to them. You have to be the one who crosses the finish line first. You cannot be in third, fourth, or fifth place because that's not going to get you the funding you're looking for. And so too many businesses will put out a very generic type of offering structure. I'll give you X number of shares of stock for Y number of dollars. But that makes you look like everybody else. And by avoiding fear of being turned down, by making your stuff as apparently as open to everybody, you've diluted it to the point that you're not superior to anyone, and it works against you. You're in a perfect world, you would tailor your offering structure and your pitch in presentation of that structure custom to the person you're talking to. It might be 80% the same to everybody you talk to, but you customize it, personalize it, you present it to them as they're the only person in the world that you're talking to, because at the moment that's true. And you want them to feel that, and that you know them and understand them and respect their resources that you're asking for. And you can't do that with a generic pitch. You just can't get there. And as another illustration of that is that you commonly will see a pitch like, I can get you 15% annualized return on investment. You're going, that's fine, but the guy who was just here was offering me 16%. So you're automatically in an inferior position. And there's 20 other guys outside the door so they can match your 15%. So where am I going to pick and choose amongst all these different players? And you can only go so far in increasing a rate of return in your offering structure before you give up everything that you're working towards. You move to more of a strategic pitch. I almost never talk to simple ROI investor candidates. I only work with strategic investors who get some other benefit from the investment outside of the investment or externalized to the investment. So if I'm talking to a supplier who's selling me something I'm putting into my goods and services, they want me to succeed so they can sell me more of those component parts or component services. And they may make more money selling to me in my supply chain than they're ever going to make within the four squares of the investment package. And that's when I know that I'm starting to get in alignment strategically with who they are, why I can create a story of value that will be saleable to that particular investor candidate.
What was the most extraordinary example from your experience where you were able to make that happen?
One of the two times in my long career that I got what I call instant funding, I got the check the same day I asked for it. I mean, it almost never happens because there's so many reasons. But we were working with a company that was looking to grow up. They'd been in operation for a number of years, and they needed capital for that growth cycle, which was mostly for inventory, marketing, sales, all the usual growth questions. And we went to one of their suppliers from whom they were buying a component part. And we told them that we needed some funding to grow up and we wanted to see if they'd be interested in supplying that. And so their question was, why would I do that? So we laid out for them the growth projection, how many units we would be making, which in turn told us how many units we'd be buying from them. And we already had an idea of what the profit margin was, a markup to us in that situation. And if we hit our projections, this company would make probably around $2 to $4 million in profits in additional sales to us over time. And the guy says, "What are you looking for?" And we said, "We need $200,000. And he said, "Wait a minute." He left. We're like, "Where'd he go? What's going on?" He comes back, he hands us a check for $200,000 because he immediately knew everything. So we hit the first one of trust. He had the money, and we stood out because anybody else asking him for money was going to be talking about a 10, 20% annualized return. And we're talking about 1,000, 2,000, 4,000% return on his investment.
Yeah.
So we checked all the boxes, and we did it to the right person at the right time with the right pitch, that there was no hesitation in getting the funding to us. And so we had a successful day, and we went home very happy.
I thank you for that story. This is such a difficult challenge for people who've never done it before. And to know that there is a possibility, because it actually happened in history, where you walked away with a check. And okay, it may never happen again, but I suspect it might occasionally. So it gives you hope.
Yeah, usually you have to, even where everything's in alignment, all the planets are in alignment, you're pitching the right story to the right candidate. It may take 3, 4, or 5 meetings to go through education, looking at the details, maybe changing the deal a little bit, a demonstration to help underscore the credibility or where you're going to go. And it may take up to 2 months, which is one of the things that when people come to me and I go, "When do you need the money?" And don't tell me yesterday, because I'm going to tell you it's probably 2 months under best case conditions. If the person's standing in front of us today, ready to go, we're still going to have to go through all this stuff in order to get things in place. And if you don't know them, you might add another 6 months of relationship building to get to that point of trust before they're going to write a check. And if you're good, you may combine all those so that by the end of the 6 months, you get the check and everything's ready to finalize. But it is a relationship process that requires enough trust that's relative to the size of money being invested, the type of deal that's involved. And so when we talk about investment crowdfunding, on one hand, this is in my mind, a consumer transaction that could be instantaneous. If we're talking about $5 million, it's not going to be an instantaneous deal unless it happens to be somebody who already owes me and they're doing a payback of some kind, and they've been waiting for the opportunity to throw some money at me.
I think you've already mentioned many of these, but what's the most common mistake that people make?
I think the most common mistake is that people assume that just because they have a business, this is one of the myths. If I'm an entrepreneur, somebody's standing out there wanting to give me money. And it's not true. These people can survive, they can live their life happily and never give you a dime. So they're not out there hunting you down. We make jokes about some people will open the Wall Street Journal and look for stocks to invest in. That is a cultural thing that happens at the high level. It's not something where they're going through all the list of investment crowdfunding campaigns trying to find that one investment in which they can put $100. It doesn't work that way. So to a large degree, they have to assume that, one, nobody knows who they are. They're invisible. And so they have to make themselves visible by being a guest on a podcast like this, by writing newsletters like I do, by doing a variety of things to make the world know that you exist and that you're out there, in hopes that you're bouncing into people who may be interested and concerned about what you're doing. Second thing is you need to know who your investor candidate is enough that you can customize a proposal, a pitch to them that matches up with who they are and what they can do. Generic offers are almost doomed to failure. And that's where most of them go to die, is they put out the same thing to everybody and nobody reacts to it. And so if you get past those two, then part of it is understanding what value you bring. And if you do it as strictly a return on investment, you're comparable with anybody else who wants money from that same person, whether it's their spouse, their kid, their church, whoever. They're all reaching a hand into the pocket of the investor candidate and you're supposed to be better than they are. That gets very difficult. But if you find that you are advancing a personal goal for a charity, or you are advancing sales into a new territory for a business, you're bringing new jobs into a community for an economic development organization, you now have a strategic benefit that you bring to the table from your success. You have to know what that is. You have to know how to communicate that to the person who may have the resources and work on that. And any good project actually may have 3 or 4 different groups of investor candidates who are getting a different type of benefit. So again, even though your core story remains the same, you have to change it and get different facets of it reflecting back to them that shows them you understand them, why you're of value to them, and how you can work together. And it needs that kind of work. And the work's on your side. You have to fill the gap. I sometimes joke that my job is like a proctor of a middle school dance where the boys are on one side and the girls on the other side of the auditorium, and nobody's dancing. The music's playing. This is a dance officially by label, and no one's dancing. And I have to go over to one of the boys and go, hey, Abigail over here says that you're cute, and if you don't go dance with her, you're an idiot. And we go back and forth, trying to get somebody to come to the floor. And then once they're on the floor, then we go to somebody else and go, look, they shouldn't be out there by themselves. You play whatever cards are available to get more people into the dance. Because most deals that come to my table are not ready for funding, meaning that they don't have all their documents together. They don't understand who they are, so they can't tell their story effectively. They're not telling their story effectively. The deal is generic rather than customized. A whole bunch of things are missing. And so when they get ready to raise funding, the person looks at them and their first thought is, you don't know what you're doing. I get these all the time where the person gives me an offer and I'm like, okay, so 1, I don't believe you, and 2, you cannot afford to lose credibility points at any point during the series conversation. Loss of 1 point could knock you out of the game. And so you have to come to the table fully capable, fully credible, by having everything ready to go, being ready to answer any question, explain how you're helping them, which is your first statement. When you start your pitch, it isn't, I'm looking for money. You can't create a more psychological retreat than that statement that I know of, because everybody will back off and run away. So you start off with, I'm doing something I think might be of help to you. That's got to be your first statement in your pitch. And then as you explain how you think you can help them, then they understand that you understand them, respect them, and you may be able to help them. And so now you've hooked them. At some point, you're going to have to say, I don't know that I can do it yet because I lack the resources I need. So we're going to get to a request for funding. But if it's helping them, then this is like going down to the store and buying ingredients for their cake. They're going, okay, yeah, now we've put it in a fashion I understand. It's all about me, the investor candidate, not about you, the person seeking funding.
Now we're going to put our money where our mouth is. I have a proposal. I want America to appreciate small towns. I grew up in a town of 800 people, actually outside because I was on a farm, but 800 people. Today, you know how many people are in that town? 800 people. 800 people. Same. Never. Okay. Now, I got this idea because I was visiting my sister-in-law who's in Texas, small town, 3,500 people. Right. And it was amazing what this town was doing through creative work. And I'm thinking, people should know about this. Americans generally should know about this. It's not that people who live in cities don't understand what neighborhoods are about. They really do understand what neighborhoods and community are about. But the challenges for a small town to attract business, to keep people living there, 800 to 800 over many years is, okay, that sounds like it's status quo, but in fact, it's declined in terms of what it's doing. Okay, that's what I'd like to do. You saw my proposal. I'm not going to bore the audience with the proposal. What were some thoughts that you had on this? Because, okay, I'll stop there.
No, I work with a lot of rural communities. I have some projects in rural communities. I work with economic development agencies. I'm a member of a state economic development where I was at for 2 days this week at their annual conference. And rural communities are handicapped primarily because of a lack of people, meaning they don't represent a large enough market, potential buyers, customers that you can do everything that you want to do. And associated with that is a lack of available local resources. And so you're automatically in the hole trying to work your way out of that. When you start talking about rural communities and doing something there, you almost have to look beyond a single community to a group of communities or a region where the aggregate population and aggregate resources may start to balance out and match with each other. You were talking about telling stories of the rural communities, helping share success stories that other communities need. And this is what economic development agencies do day in, day out, is they look for those stories and they try to get other communities to mirror or follow or team up with the one community that's already successful. And they have to do this because by and large, most rural communities are in a state of decline, they're in a state of retreat. The reason for the origin of that community was typically tied to agriculture, mining, forestry, or something of that nature. And that business, that industry is either no longer existent or it's diminished to the point that it's not providing the income. I sometimes laugh. I've walked into a rural community all filled with farmers, and I would start off with, "It's great to be talking to a group of exporters." And then immediately they all go, "What?" And I go, "Yeah." I said, "You grow wheat, corn, whatever it is." And they're going, "Yeah." And I said, "And you don't consume 100% of that here in the community?" And they're like, "No, we sell it to the grain elevator," which is why they're confused, because they have basically an intermediary who buys it from them and then ships it out to
Right.
someone else. But if they were not creating more product or services than what they consume, then this community from a macro standpoint is upside down. And a lot of communities have reached that point where they're in a state of diminishment because there's not enough local products or services generated that are sold outside of their community in order to bring money back into the community. And worse yet, this is one of my special pet peeves, and I get crosswise with a lot of my fellow economic developers on this, is that a lot of times economic development programs will result in exporting cash profits from the community.
Oh.
So if, for example, I bring a restaurant into town that's part of a national chain, that restaurant is going to sell food and services. They're going to take the profits, and the profits are going out of town. They're not coming back. And yet, if you talk to an economic development office, it's recruitment and retention are the two R's of economic development. And if they spend all their time recruiting, they basically are causing the money in that community to hemorrhage over time, where it's in a constant diminishment. And then just to stick my finger in the eye of the whole question, I go, does anybody in this town use a credit card? And invariably, everybody's laughing. Of course, everybody uses credit cards. And I says, what's the payment processing fee on the card? Which they'll tell you it's 3.5%, but it averages closer to 5.5% of every transaction. I said, 100% of that money is going to leave town and never come back. Okay. And so by definition, you are bleeding out all the time, every time somebody buys anything with a credit card. And the only way you can offset that is if you have more products and services generated that are sold out of town than you're buying into the town. If Amazon, who I use because of convenience, does nothing but deliver stuff and nothing ever gets picked up by UPS and shipped out of town, that town's in trouble. And it needs to rethink its entire economic base. It needs to move away from the old primary industries. It needs to import new businesses that are headquartered there that are creating the products and services to get to a net cash flow.
Gee, this is really going to be an uphill battle for me. And all I wanted to do was tell her stories.
The good news is that a story is in a digital format. Your ability to position it where it can be seen is relatively easy and getting easier every day, where you can either publish, like I do, a newsletter on LinkedIn or some other format, or you can do your show, which is broadcast around the world where anyone can see it. So you have some advantages of distribution, but the stories then have to be, who's going to watch the story? Are they watching it for entertainment? Are they watching it for education? Is this actually a tutorial on how to revitalize your local community? Then your audience has shrunk because most people in an urban area aren't going to care or watch for that reason. You're narrowed your audience, but you're still huge and still massive. But now you have to be thinking in terms of who is my true customer. That's one question, because you may want to do a subscription service pay-per-view to generate money to pay you for your work. You may want to go broadcast and supplant pay-per-view with a sponsor advertiser who wants to put their name at the bottom and be associated with what you do, in which case you need to have enough people in the audience to get them to pay enough money to do that. And then you have the ability to spin off special case studies. You can move this into an educational format that's aligned maybe with community colleges or economic development offices, where they can act as a retailer of a success story with enough detail in it that it becomes a paint by number kit and not what I call a 30,000 flyover. Hey, look down there, somebody did something successful. It's not close enough for me to see how they did it, so I'm just going to have to cheer them on, but I can't apply it to my own situation.
Okay, I'm full. I've got more that I can do. But this has been great to hear the counter to what I had in my mind. It's because it's now I'm thinking about new ways I can do this completely. And I think that's part of
But
your method.
yeah, no, I mean, at this state conference, we probably had 5 presentations on rural communities, different things they can do. One of them I disagree with, which is recruiting out of town businesses to set up a satellite facility and push money out of the community. I also argue a little bit with some of the housing programs where all the money comes in, but at some point in the life of that housing project, the combined principal and interest that's leaving the city exceeds the initial investment, and the whole project goes upside down from cash flow. This is an issue of mine that I'm trying to counteract with communities. And primarily that's to help start a small business that can grow up to a certain size and scale. The joke was, we did this for one community. I said, it can't have more than 15 employees. And they go, why? I said, it's because at that point, they're going to be attractive enough that a larger city is going to recruit them to leave and come to the larger community. So we had a cap on how far we could go. But it is important for these communities to be creative, to know what kind of opportunities they can do. And they do have access via the internet or via UPS or an overnight shipping to pretty much service anyone in the world.
Yeah.
And then if a person prefers to live in an idyllic community with the mountains in the background and a lake in the foreground,
Yes.
and they can go walking around the lake during their lunch hour instead of going through downtown in traffic. Although electric vehicles are reducing the gas content of the air, it's still a little bit toxic.
It's still a bit.
Yeah, every business can fill a niche, it can provide value. If it can provide value, then it's a matter of matching with appropriate resources of people who also stand to gain from the success of that business. And that's what my motivated money method is about, is let's shorten the funding process by talking to those who stand to benefit alongside of the business as it grows and succeeds. And that speeds the process, reduces the cost of raising capital so that the business model remains intact.
Karl Dakin, this has been amazing. You've opened up all kinds of ideas in my mind. Thank you so much.
You're quite welcome, Madeline. Again, happy to be a guest on your show. Happy to help any small business that is interested in doing something. I offer to anyone in the world a free 15-minute chat with me to try to address their capital concerns. They can reach out to me via my email, which is kdakin@dakincapital.com. We'll schedule a time. We'll see if we can get you over whatever challenge or hurdle that you might be facing in your fundraising efforts.
Thank you very much.
Every now and then, there is something that changes how I think about the world. Grounds for Thought is a place where I talk about these moments so that you can explore the meaning for yourself.
I've been reading The Mindful Marketer by Lisa Norell. I love it when a book offers summary notes at the end of each chapter. It's a quick way to get through the book and you feel you know what the author is trying to say, but it's also great to review the material, which helps it get in your mind. So it helps you in learning. But this book offers something different, but no less useful. At the end of each chapter, it offers a question. For example, at the end of chapter 1, it asks, what are my top 5 resources for identifying trends in society, our customer base, and within my organization? Now, this is a great question for me because it reminds me to check the trends that I have already identified, but more often than not, forget to check again. The question is simple, it's actionable and useful, and one that means that I have to change my daily habits. The next chapter asks, are our digital marketing initiatives and habits creating chaos or alleviating stress in people's lives? I had to think about that one. I post lots on social media, and I publish a newsletter, a mental espresso, a blog post on Psychology Today, a Grounds for Thought, and a show. All of my posts lead back to my show except for the blog. It reminds me that when I blog on something, it needs to be consistent with my main message of the opening possibilities for the resilient leader in each person. And as I write this, I realize that it does. The blog is called Resilient Leadership, but I think it could think about this more. It could be closer aligned with the show. I can see the blog being a different aspect of, or perhaps a longer treatment of the week's Grounds for Thought. Every chapter has another question. At the end of another chapter, I'm asked, how can I shift my internal conversations from what drives revenue to what creates lifelong customers and brand repute? I think I've always been driven by creating lifelong customers and brand repute. As I write this, I'm reminded of the thousands of loyal listeners to this show. My challenge now is to drive revenue without losing those amazing customers. Now, if you've noticed, I've told you only the questions, and yet you can see that I've already turned things into where I need actions. And in some cases, what actions I should take. And I'm sorry, when you read a book and you spend that time, what you really want from it is something that you can take into your company and make it better. It's with action. So as I write this, I ask myself, what would you do, Madeline, if you considered every question at the end of the 22 chapters in this book? I like to do things incrementally, so I'm going to stick with the 3 for now. But when I write my next book, I'm going to use questions at the end of each chapter. And why not add questions at the end of every Grounds for Thought and even every show? The Mindful Marketer by Lisa Norell. Which of the questions I shared spoke to you today? And what are you going to do about it? Thank you for joining me today. I hope you've enjoyed how Karl makes the idea of seeking funding actually feel realistic, although a lot of work. I'm Madeline Blair, wishing you infinite possibilities as you unlock your resilient leader.